Hello, everyone, and welcome back to what I feel like is an epic interview, a historic interview with Joseph Smith historian Dan Vogel. I'm Dr. John DeLynn. It is January 9th, 2019, and we spent a good 2.5 hours talking to Dan Vogel just about some of his history. I realized that I tried to do too much today. I could talk to Dan Vogel about his history for weeks, let alone 2.5 hours. And we didn't cover nearly enough of his story, but we got enough of his story to give you a flavor for him and some of the various works, what got him into Mormon history, his faith journey, some of the works that he's published, and some of his interesting interactions, including some interactions with Brett Metcalf and Mark Hoffman and others, Michael Marquardt. Great stuff. Make sure and check out the first 2.5 hours on Dan Vogel if you haven't yet. What we're now going to do is what I consider is the main purpose that I wanted to interview Dan today. We are going to do a deep dive into Joseph Smith's use of folk magic and then Joseph Smith's creation of the Book of Mormon. If we have time, we're going to do a robust Q&A at the end. But those are the two main things that I wanted to cover. Again, we are going to be featuring today the book, Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet. For me, this is one of the most important books ever written in Mormonism, and I think it's a better biography than Rough Stone Rolling. I don't want to say it's better than Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History, but it's certainly as important to modern Mormonism, in my view, as is that book. I'm loving this book. And just to give you a little bit more background, I mentioned this in the first episode. We are launching a new initiative on Mormon Stories called the Truth Claims Project. So if you go to mormonstories.org/truth-claims, you can see a whole bunch of essays that have been donated to us by an amateur historian. We're going to be refining those essays over time so that Mormon Stories website has its own series of essays or stories about the various truth claims. The very first of which we're working on is the one on treasure digging. So if you go to mormonstories.org/treasure, you'll see an essay there about Joseph Smith's treasure digging. We think it's a solid essay. And what we've done is we've purchased a billboard that's going to be going live in Salt Lake City in the next week or so. And it's basically going to say, was Joseph Smith a treasure digger? ? mormonstories.org/treasure. And it's going to be trying to get more people who are unaware of the issues around the church history and truth claims to become aware, again, so that they can make informed decisions about their lives. And that's this project. And so each month, we're going to be featuring a new essay, a new topic. We're going to be releasing, hopefully, an in-depth podcast episode on the various topics. Next month will be the Book of Mormon. So we're kind of hitting both treasure digging and Book of Mormon with Dan Vogel today. And that will be the first 2 months. And we hope that the billboard will change from month 1 to month 2, from a question about treasure digging to a question about how the Book of Mormon was made. And then you'll see us in the future cover issues like polyandry and the Book of Abraham and Masonry and the Temple and all those issues. And we're excited about it. You can, if you really support this billboard initiative, you can go to mormonstories.org/billboard, donate to the billboard project. 100% of your donations will go to the billboard. None will be taken for overhead. We just want to promote this project, and that's our motives. And we're grateful to our generous donor who has made all this possible, who at the current time wishes to remain anonymous, but we're thankful for him. We're glad all of you are joining us on Facebook Live. We hope that you will send in your comments and questions as we talk about treasure digging and the Book of Mormon. And that's how the next at least 3 or 4 hours is going to proceed. How does that sound?
Let's go for it.
Let's go for it. All right. So I'm going to turn the laptop around and you'll be able to see Dan. All right. So Dan Vogel, as I think about, welcome back to Mormon Stories, by the way.
I'm here.
Okay, so what so many people care about is just to understand how Mormonism came to be, which as I'm tracing it back, there's the founding of the church, but the founding of the church sort of required the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon led to the founding of the church. And in my view, and I think many's, it was Joseph's treasure digging and folk magic experiences that led to the creation of the Book of Mormon. And Joseph Smith's treasure digging didn't happen in a vacuum. We've got good evidence that this treasure digging stuff was happening in the Americas in the 1700s and maybe even earlier. So what I want to do in the next four hours with you today is try and just give our listeners an overview of the history of folk magic that led to Joseph Smith's treasure digging, that led to the Book of Mormon, that led to the creation of the church. That's what I want to do. And we're going to have to balance being thorough with managing our time because there's so much. And that's why this book is so urgent. Go buy this book right now. It's brilliant. It's amazing. If you look at my comments, this book is just, it's all stars and underlines because I'm loving this book so much. Again, Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet with Dan Vogel. So let's begin by talking about the history of treasure digging prior to Joseph Smith ever engaging in it. And I think I want to begin, again, I'm on the Mormon Stories website with this essay on treasure digging, and I'm going to read a quote from Benjamin Franklin to kind of tee this off. Is that okay? Yeah? So here we go.
Better than me.
Benjamin Franklin writes, and this would have been 1730, somewhere in the early 1700s, Benjamin Franklin would have wrote this. He's wrote, "There are among us great numbers of honest artificers and laboring people who, fed with the vain hope of growing suddenly rich, neglect their business almost to the ruining of themselves and families, and voluntarily endure abundance of fatigue in a fruitless search after imaginary hidden treasure. They wander through the woods and bushes by day to discover the marks and signs. At midnight, they repair to the hopeful spot with spades and pickaxes. Full of expectation, they labor violently, trembling at the same time in every joint, through fear of certain malicious demons who are said to haunt and guard such places. At length, a mighty hole is dug, and perhaps several cartloads of earth thrown out. But alas, no keg or iron pot is found. No seaman's chest crammed with Spanish pistols or weighty pieces of eight. Then they conclude that through some mistake in the procedure, some rash word spoke, or some rule of art neglected, the guardian spirit had power to sink it deeper into the earth and convey it out of their reach." So this is Benjamin Franklin in the early 1700s talking about a con, I would call it, or a practice, or folk magic, or whatever it is. People were doing this as early as the 1700s and probably before. And that's important context to then fast forward to the Smith family. And so where I want to begin is before Joseph Smith. Can you begin by talking to us about to what extent we would be aware of any of Joseph Smith's, his father or any of his ancestors being involved in this sort of stuff? Let's start there.
Okay, well, I think first that we should talk about money digging in general, because there's different kinds. It's not all a con. There's sincere believers among the money diggers, and there's different kinds of money digging. There's some people that just get a treasure map and they go out and dig and try to find the treasure according to the map. Then there's others that use various devices to try to find the treasure, and they might use a forked rod, where they put tension on it, just like a water witcher, and walk along and wait for it to dip, and they dig there. They're trying to get help in finding the treasure, or water, or salt sometimes, or whatever. They might be finding lost objects, like the rod might lead them to cows out of a runaway or something. Or so there's people that use these quasi scientific methods of trying to find treasure. Some use seer stones that we know because of Joseph Smith using a seer stone, but a stone, a special stone, a stone that's found in a special way, something that's curious looking. They believed had special properties, just like the rod worker. And they would put it in their hat. Joseph Smith wasn't the only one, but they would put it in their hat and look in, and the spiritual light would shine, and they would see places, a stump of a tree, or some kind of location, a tree with a hand painted on it. Josiah Stoll mentioned, or Joseph Smith mentioned. But so there were these people that thought these were scientific methods, and they were totally sincere. And the reason why they're sincere is because, well, some people see things, but the rod especially, even now, they've tested people that use rods and how it works. They can never find the water. They've been tested. Nobody can really make it work, but they still believe it works. And they always have an excuse for why it doesn't work. But there is a thing called the Ideomotor Response, which is the same thing that makes Ouija boards appear to move by themselves, where the person doesn't feel like they're making it move. It's sort of like auto-suggestion. And the Ouija board would move, or they would hold the rod, and the rod is in tension, and just the slightest movement of the wrist will make it dip. Some people use the metal rods that are L-shaped that come out of their hands, and if you just twist your wrist just slightly, it will move. Now, these people that do this don't know they're moving their hands. So the reason why I'm telling you this is because I believe Joseph Smith Sr. was a rod worker in Vermont, and I believe he had a sincere belief that the rod would work. And people in New York described him using the rod after they moved there. He would use the rod, and so he was what I believe, he was a sincere. He wasn't, Joseph Smith Sr. wasn't a charlatan. He was a sincere believer. And he would locate treasure, especially in mountains around New York, around his property in Manchester, New York. And then there was another group. There was, moving from rod workers to seers. Seers, they were all around Joseph Smith in Manchester, New York. There was Sally Chase, William Stafford, about a mile south of the Smiths, had a stone. Other people had stones around. Samuel Lawrence would be another seer that was a competitor of Joseph Smith. This is his environment.
And Lumen Walters, right?
And Lumen Walters. Now, Lumen Walters brings in another kind of money digger altogether. While these people are using these devices, and some of them might make excuses of magical excuses of, the treasure's moved. There's a guardian spirit guarding the treasure. Some legends had it that, like Captain Kidd, everybody's trying to find Captain Kidd's treasure up and down.
Who was Captain Kidd?
Robert Kidd. He was a pirate. He was a pirate. He stole money from other ships, other places, and they believed he hid some of this loot somewhere on the East Coast. Maybe he made it up the Susquehanna River, maybe as far as Harmony, Pennsylvania, So, but Lumen Walters added a dimension to it.
And so Captain Kidd, there was rumors that he would have taken this pirate's booty, this treasure, and buried it somewhere in New England.
Yeah.
And
that he killed somebody, slit their throat, threw the body in, buried it, so that the spirit would haunt the treasure and scare people away from the treasure and protect the treasure.
And so that's where the idea of an angel or a ghost or a protector of the treasure comes from.
Yeah.
That I think eventually becomes Nephi Moroni, but that's
right.
That's me.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Joseph So Joseph and Joseph's dad and others are swimming in all of this
lore.
Yeah.
Treasure lore.
Okay. You were going to talk about Lumen Walters.
Now, Lumen Walters, he brought a different dimension that I think Joseph Smith latched onto. And this was the part he liked even more than the other part. But Lumen Walters would try to control the spirit by driving in stakes around the treasure. And 12 was the magical number usually. Metal stakes or wooden stakes. Before that, sometimes they would drive a stake right on top of where they believed the treasure was to hold the treasure to the place. And then
spiritually.
Hold it to the place. And then they would take and they would walk around the periphery and read a magic incantation from usually in Latin, they thought. And in order to make the spirit leave the circle so that the treasure would be safe to dig it. And as one story goes, they dug around the treasure, like around that pole in the center, so that they believed that the treasure was within this cone of earth. And they were going to try to get it before the spirit would come. And they would tear into the mound of earth, hoping to find the treasure, and it would be gone. And they would say that the spirit had moved the treasure through the earth magically by enchantment to another location. And this is exactly what Joseph Smith did with the Spanish treasure in Harmony, Pennsylvania.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
Okay, so did Joseph meet Lumen Walters? Did he actually watch him do his thing and learn from him?
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just jump to Joseph Smith. So Joseph Smith's first diggings or locating treasure was on the
Actually,
okay.
let me pause you. I'm sorry. I know I'm trying to rush and be thorough simultaneously.
Yeah.
There's a sense from your book that I get, and I got this from Kathleen Malinakis' book as well, that Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy are almost grooming Joseph Smith Jr. to become some sort of seer or prophet or special person with powers. Do I have that right? In other words, would Joseph Jr. have been primed in some way to start doing some of these seer and prophet-like things by his parents?
Okay, so there is stories coming from Vermont, from the Green Mountain Boys, as they called themselves in 1844, published by Thomas Sharp. The Green Mountain Boys make a statement that when your father lived here, he said that Joseph Smith was special, and because he was born with a veil over his face. Now, this veil probably goes into magic folklore and it's sometimes called a cowl. And it's when the baby's born and a piece of the amniotic sac is stuck to its head, like a cowl, a veil over his face. And it's supposed to be a magical omen to be lucky. And so that was like an omen that these people from Vermont are claiming. They also said, and your father said he's going to find a special stone for you. We remember that, and they're kind of mocking Joseph Smith. And so there is this. There's also in the Smith family, Asel Smith and Mary Duty Smith. When she came to Kirtland finally and joined the church, she believed Joseph Smith fulfilled this expectation in the Smith family that a prophet will be born in their line. And she believed it was fulfilled in Joseph Smith. So there's that. There's Joseph Smith was named after his father. He was Joseph Smith was the inheritor of the father's talent for having prophetic dreams. And
because Joseph Smith Sr. had several dreams and visions.
So Joseph Smith Sr. had dreams and visions, and Joseph Smith's, what he did kind of fulfilled those dreams, because that was the only way he could get his father's attention.
Okay.
It was the authority, the line magic, money digging, dreams. This was the line of authority he had with his father to get his father's attention, to unite the family.
Right. Okay, so one other thing briefly before we jump back. And so Joseph Smith Sr. would have been involved in treasure digging prior to Joseph Smith Jr., do you
he
think?
had a rod in Vermont, but he wasn't part of the wood scrape thing that Quinn tried to make much out of. I believe Oliver Cowdery's father William Cowdery, was involved with that wood scrape in Wells, Vermont. But I don't believe Joseph Smith was, or
Okay.
Joseph Smith Sr. I don't believe he was involved with them, although it was kind of claimed later interpreters.
Is it fair to say that Joseph Smith Sr. and other family members of his generation would have been involved just generally in folk magic, superstition stuff? That was kind of, I don't want to say gypsy, but kind of like the family culture background from his ancestry, from his heritage.
Well, I don't know if it goes back before Joseph Smith Sr.
Okay.
But Joseph Smith Sr. was involved. He did it in New York. The neighbors describe him doing it in New York. Peter Ingersoll was their neighbor immediately to the north of their farm. And he describes in detail Joseph Smith Sr. using the rod and a stone he just grabbed off the ground and put in his hat and said, "Oh, there's a treasure back of my house. You don't know the treasures that are behind my house." Well, there's a hill right behind Joseph Smith Sr.'s house. And this is the first hill they probably dug on for treasure. And William Stafford describes how Joseph Smith located the treasure in that hill. Joseph Smith Sr. stayed in the house. Joseph Smith Jr. stayed in the house. Joseph Smith Sr. went and asked William if he wanted to participate, and they did. They didn't find anything. And Joseph Smith Sr. went into the house for a while, came back and told William Stafford that Joseph Smith Jr. was watching the whole time in his stone, and said that the spirit had come up and moved it.
So this is from Joseph Smith Jr.'s very earliest years. He's watching his dad do this. Mm-hmm. He's seeing his dad do it. He's seeing Lumen Walters come into town. There are all these lores. There are all these other figures like Sally Chase and others. And so he's kind of swimming in treasure digging, at least to some degree, in his childhood and youth.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk briefly about, just really briefly about Joseph Smith Sr.'s inability to sort of provide for his family and to what extent treasure digging might have been financially motivated, like genuinely financially motivated, or not.
Well, Alvin, the oldest son, who died in 1823, in November 19th, 1823. Before that, he was the father figure in the house, really. And Joseph Smith Sr. is a shadowy figure, as Lucy describes him herself in her history. He's always needs her guidance, and she's the one that steps in and saves the farm at one time, and at other times they lose the farm. They eventually lose the farm after Alvin's death. But money digging, they did legitimate farming, and I believe they were legitimate hard workers up until a point. And the odd thing is that after they lose the farm, they get accused of being lazy, but I believe it's just because they don't own it anymore and they're less interested. But they did lose the farm after Alvin's death. They couldn't make the last payment. And the odd thing is that this happened in 1825, and this is where Lucy dramatically describes the landlord coming. They bought it out from underneath them because they couldn't make the last payment. And during this very time, Joseph Smith Sr. is gone digging for treasure with Joseph Smith Jr.
Right.
in Harmony, Pennsylvania.
We'll definitely get to that. Okay. But I was just trying to establish that Joseph Smith Sr., I want to think that somehow eventually Joseph Smith Jr.'s involvement in treasure digging and the creation of the Book of Mormon were both, at least in part, attempts to make money for the family. And so I just wanted to establish that Joseph Smith Sr. was not a great provider financially, and then Alvin's death sort of dealt a second blow to the Smith family financial fortune, which then sets up, if we can't farm and if we're on the frontier and we don't know how to make money, that treasure digging, then the Book of Mormon, and then a religion all become sort of, at least in part, financially motivated. Is that too much of a stretch?
Well, what I would say is that after Alvin's death, and Alvin was like a legitimate provider through hard work, labor, the normal standard way of doing things in society that way. Joseph Smith Jr., though, raised the dignity of the family through what he was doing. And they, of course, I can't say that, that's financially motivated. I don't really believe it. I believe finances are always going to be intertwined with it. But if you're going to make money through Mormonism, you don't put in your book condemnation of the hireling priests, that are making money off of preaching. You just made your job twice as hard if that was your goal.
Right. So you're saying it wasn't money was never a primary motivation, but that
it's there, but I don't believe it was the major goal is to get money.
Okay.
If your goal is to make money, you don't make that institution go right into debt by building a temple you can't afford.
Right.
So you just blew all your chances of making money off of your scheme.
Right.
So I don't believe that was it.
Okay. That's important. Okay. So when did Joseph Smith first start getting involved in treasure digging? What's the earliest year that we're aware of that he was actually participating?
The neighbors in Manchester say 1820, and there is a dispute over when he actually got his first stone and which stone came first. He had two stones, a white one and a brown stone, and Pomeroy Tucker, in his book about Mormonism, 1877, and he was the printer for the Book of Mormon, actually, there in Palmyra. He was the printer, not the publisher, but the guy that was a foreman of the printing office. And Pomeroy Tucker said that Joseph Smith got a white seer stone in 1819, but he got all the facts wrong. He said he got it from the well, and that it was white and it was shaped like a baby's foot. The well stone didn't come until 1822, according to Willard Chase, because it was his well that they were digging in. So for Joseph Smith, he's the con man. Okay, he may have had some sincere parts to it, but he was willing to use a con to get money for doing this anyway, by using trickery. And so if he did have any sincere part, that becomes unimportant once you catch him at using deception. Then deceptions takes over to the interpretation.
Well, we'll go into this later because there's this whole pious fraud concept that's attributed to you that you discuss at length in the book and in your YouTube videos. where you're trying to say it's both. He had some sincere belief and he was fooling people, but maybe when he was fooling people, it was for a higher cause. But you're saying, okay, so he was born what year approximately, or exactly? Joseph Smith was born
December 23rd, 1805.
1805. So you're saying as early as 1819 or 1820, he's starting to be involved in treasure digging. So he would have been around 15, you're saying, when he started? Okay. And did he start having a stone, or did he start by helping other people out, like his dad or other people? Or do we know?
No, there's no like he was a digger first, and because I don't think he really ever dug very much. Actually, he made everybody else do it.
Okay.
But
so does it start with him finding a stone? Is that what it starts with?
okay, well, that's the purpose when you're a con man, is how do you create confidence? If you're a confidence scheme, you have to build confidence. How do you build confidence? Through the stone. You can't just go get a stone. If I get a stone and I go, oh, this is a magical stone, who's going to believe it? Nobody. But if you get a stone that someone else that already has a reputation, like Sally Chase and Willard Chase's family, says is a real stone, and you take that stone and start using it, you're more credible.
Okay, so about that, because when I read in your book around 1825, after he gives up treasure digging, I guess he gives the stone back to the Chases, and then he sends Hiram to go re-get the stone. That led me to believe he believed the stone really had special powers. Else, why would he need to go get that specific stone from the Chases? He would just find another stone. But you're saying he didn't ask for that stone back because he believed it had special powers. You're saying you believe he asked for that stone back because that stone was an important part of people believing that he had special powers.
Right. That's the whole deal. How do you convince people?
But wasn't there also a time where he goes out and finds his own stone separate from the one he got from the Chases?
That was the white stone. And the white stone didn't give him the reputation he needed.
Oh.
So even though he said he had a dream, he went and dug it up. But the Chase had declared this a real stone. And Willard tried to say, oh, it was just a curiosity. But it wasn't. It was a real seer stone as far as he and probably his sister, Sally. Sally had a bluish green colored stone that was set into a paddle that she held up in the light and looked through. And so he got the stone.
Around what year did he get the stone?
1822. It was taken out of the well.
So before Alvin dies, he's getting the stone.
Before Alvin died.
Okay.
Right. So he has his own stone, and he did give it back in 1825 during the revival.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Okay, so he gets the stone in 1822.
He gave it back to them, and then got it again.
Right. But he starts with let's follow it. So he gets it in 1822. You're saying?
Yeah, 1822.
And he will have already seen Lumen Walters do his thing. He would have
not yet.
Okay. So what happens? 1822.
Yeah.
How does he get into treasure digging?
Okay. Well, the first place is the hill behind their house. Okay, that he used that stone with. Because the father went into the house, and Joe Smith said that he watched the whole thing in the stone and saw the spirit. Alvin and Willard Chase hired Lumen Walters before Alvin died, okay? And they went and dug on a hill that was owned, the hill was actually owned by Abner Cole, who was the newspaper man and justice of the peace in Palmyra. He owned the hill, and that's why in 1830 and 31 he writes about Lumen Walters. He owns the hill. That's how he knows.
Right. Yeah. So does that suggest that Alvin Smith and Joe Smith Sr., who were the two that hired Lumen Walters?
Alvin and Willard Chase.
And Willard Chase. Does that mean they believed that Lumen Walters had special powers?
Yes.
So that means Alvin was a sincere believer
Yes.
in the special power of treasure digging.
Right.
Okay. So they hired Lumen Walters, then what?
And so did Willard Chase also.
Right.
He's a believer.
Right.
So they hired Lumen Walters to find the treasure on this hill. And it's usually hills. And it's the hill that's behind the Smith home in Palmyra, or Manchester, sorry. The next hill over is this one called Old Sharp, which supposedly Joe Smith dug on also. And then the next hill after that, it's called Minor Road now, is a hill, and the people that actually lived there, they didn't own it because Abner Cole owned it, but the people that actually lived there was Lorenzo Saunders and his family. Enoch Saunders was his father's name. And they owned the hill, and they let Joe Smith Sr. dig. And, Alvin and Willard Chase. And Willard Chase, and this is like right off of the Canandaigua Road, and Willard Chase lives a little north of that. And they're digging on it, but they finally got disenchanted with Lumen Walters.
Were they trying to get rich? Like, why were they?
Yeah, oh yeah.
They just thought there was treasure there.
It's just extra insurance to try to make money.
Okay.
Alvin's a hard worker, though.
Right.
So they finally got rid of, this is probably where Joseph Smith saw Lumen Walters with his stuffed toad and, a book with Latin enchantments and saw him go in the circle. And that's where he saw that.
Okay.
And that was a good cover for when you don't find anything. But
the cover being what?
the cover story for when you don't find a treasure
Is what?
Oh, it sunk. The enchantment didn't
Right,
work.
right.
I didn't say it just right.
Somebody did something wrong.
Yeah.
We didn't sacrifice.
So let me add here real quickly, forward to the temple. This is where you get the spirit out of the circle. This is where if you don't say it just right and it's not performed just right, when you baptize them, the feet came out or whatever. It doesn't work. It has to be done over, And so I believe this is probably the seeds of that.
You're saying the circle of the true order of prayer comes out of the
or just the temple, where you dedicate the temple to keep evil spirits out, and things like that.
Okay, all right.
I think that's where the seeds of that come from this. But,
So Lumen Walters didn't work out.
and the ceremonial magic,
Right.
okay, is different than just your run-of-the-mill folk magic. Sally Chase, she used a stone, and the other people used the rods, but they didn't use this ceremonial magic to try to control spirits. And this is what Joseph Smith liked.
Got it.
Okay, so this is just this stuff of making a religion.
Okay.
So they fired Lumen Walters eventually. Then Joseph looked in his stone. Joseph Jr. looked in his stone and said that he saw a golden throne. This is according to Lorenzo Saunders, who lived on the land. And that there was an Indian chief sitting on the throne inside the hill in a cave. Then Lorenzo Saunders says Joseph Smith Sr. started digging there day and night, digging this tunnel in the east side of the hill. It's always the east side. Okay? It was even on the east side on the hill Cumorah until Joseph Smith changed it to the west side to say, see, I told you the wrong place. But it was always the east side of a hill that was, the prime target for digging. And
where does the angel Moroni point? Towards the east, right?
It's always east. It's a religious thing. It's magical. But so Joseph Smith Sr. digs a tunnel, which is still there now to this day. They just uncovered it. This one researcher went there because he read some of my articles.
That's cool.
And he got permission to take a plow and dig in the side of the hill, and he found the entrance of the tunnel again. It was open until 19-something, and then you washed over and eventually. I think they covered it on purpose because it was too dangerous, but you can still see the pickaxe things that Joseph Smith Sr. made. And
so he's already believing that his son maybe has these powers.
yeah.
And I'm guessing that when Joseph associates a treasure with an Indian, that's just coming out of all the Indian lore and the mound builders that you talked about.
And the mound builders.
And so he's trying to be a vision. Well, he's either trying to be a visionary and have visions and sincerely find treasure, or he's fooling his dad. Do you have a theory on which one he's doing that early? Is he?
Well, there's no textual document.
Okay.
Nothing saying I'm really fooling my dad, but.
Right. I mean, it'd be impossible for you to know. Do you have a theory?
Yeah, you can't distinguish at this point.
All we know is that
at this particular thing.
All we know is Joseph Smith Seniors believe in Joseph already, and he's starting to dig stuff. Okay, keep going.
So finally, and the reason we know the date of this too, because Lorenzo Saunders says it was they stopped digging, and his father ordered him to make a door for it, and they locked it. And this was before his father died, and his father died on the 10th of October, 1825.
Whose father?
Lorenzo Saunders.
Okay.
So it was Enoch. I just happen to remember it for some reason, but Enoch Saunders, the father, died 10th of October, 1825. So all this, Alvin and Walter's the Magician, was before that date.
Okay.
So I maintain Joseph Smith started getting a reputation, though, that exceeded all the other seers in the area because he used trickery. Because he would steal a cow and hide it and pretend to find it. Steal somebody's tool, and then they would come to him and say, "Can you find this?" These guys can't, and he would find it.
And there's decent documentation that he was...
So Jesse Townsend, who was Lucy's minister in the Presbyterian Church, said that Joseph Smith used to find lost objects a little too well. Mm-hmm. So there is an accusation of that. But I believe it's probably the way he built his reputation and why his exceeded everybody else's. He was ambitious and wanted to, at this time in his life, he wanted to be the best seer that there ever was in this area. He was competing with these people. There is another theory, though, about seers in Europe. They're in Europe and England, and it's that they pretend to be seers in order to scare away thieves. You know, it protects more of their property than any gun ever did. Some people would say back in England.
Superstition.
No, it's just a way of scaring thieves. Because if a thief took it and you claimed to be a seer, you would find it and catch him.
Got it.
And they would be afraid to steal from you.
So something that seems significant to me. Again, we have this term prophet, seer, and revelator, thinking that that's somehow some divine restored idea. The term seer was a common term during that time of somebody who would look into a stone or whatever and try and find magical objects. So that's where...
There were other names like peeper or stone gazer was on the 1826 trial documents.
Scryer, glass looker. Juggler. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was illegal, by the way.
Right.
To pretend, it was always pretending in the law. Pretending to find lost objects was against the law.
And Joseph wanted to be the best person at that. At an illegal activity. At an illegal activity.
Yeah.
Okay. And he probably knew it was illegal.
Yeah, but no, it's like spitting on the sidewalk.
Okay.
You know, it's
misdemeanor.
Nobody cares. Nobody does anything unless somebody complains.
Until 1826. Okay.
Yeah, until someone complains, like Josiah Stoll's nephew.
Right. So, so Joseph is starting to he wants to be the best seer in the neighborhood. He starts to get a good reputation. How does it build?
Well, the next target was digging for gold plates. This is 1825 on the Hill Cumorah on the east side. in
Okay, wait a minute.
1825.
Okay, wait a minute. So let's go back.
Yeah.
So it's important to say the revival that we talked about in the last episode happens in 1824. And that's when, because Alvin dies in 1823. I got this from your book.
Right.
Alvin dies in 1823. Lucy kind of goes into a depression. She's all worried. Alvin's minister says, one of the local ministers, I think it's Presbyterian, right, says that Alvin's going to hell.
Yep.
That offends the family. Lucy's worried. But in some twist of offense, all this, the revival that happened in 1824 leads Lucy to convert to the Presbyterian Church, right?
Right.
And Joseph's investigating Methodism, not Presbyterianism, right? And during that time, he gives up the stone back to the chases,
Right.
and gives up treasure digging. So there's no
He repents.
So there's no important treasure digging that happens between 1822 and 1824 that we need to mention. It's just, we know that he did it. We know that he repents of it.
Okay.
Gives the stone
something
back.
we should probably cover, besides digging on the Hill Cumorah around 1825, not him, but a money digging company, because he pointed out that there was gold plates there.
But we're not at 1825 yet.
No,
I just
but
want to.
this ties in with 1823 when he
Okay.
starts claiming that there's plates in that hill.
Who does?
Joseph Smith.
So in 1823, tell us about that. What does he claim?
1823, just like the story goes.
Alvin's still alive, right?
Alvin's still alive. He points out, he claims that there's gold plates in the hill.
And where's he coming up with this idea of gold plates? Why plates?
I don't know, but I don't know why he picked plates, but he picked plates just like the golden throne, it's an object. But he has no plans of ever getting them.
But you mentioned, I think in the book, that one theory is that coming up with the idea of plates would explain how they would have survived in the ground for so long.
Yeah, there's that.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that might be one reason. And maybe he heard about
that it's a golden
writings
book.
On plates.
There are legends of Indian books, a lost Indian book.
But gold also it's this seems like it's this holdover from the Captain Kidd stuff. It's like gold. It's worth a lot, and everybody's looking for money. So some type of writing, it's sort of like Native Americans, some sort of ancient writing, and gold, right? And plates that would preserve it. I'm just trying to come up with what he would assemble in his mind. Those might seem like the components. Gold because it's precious and valuable. Plates because it would be preserved. Writings because we're trying to explain where the Indians came from or what they thought or what they were doing.
Yeah.
And Indians because everybody was thinking about the Indians. Is that?
Well, at this point, I believe he has this book in the hill that he reads when it's still in the hill.
That is the golden plate?
And he's telling the stories to his family.
Okay, so with the stone,
this is my theory.
Okay,
this is not laid out anywhere. But why a book? Why in the hill? What is he trying to do at this early stage? Because what came later is totally different than what it started out as.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so he doesn't have any plans of getting these plates, and there was no continuity that he invented later. There was no every year he goes to the hill and talks to the messenger. Why go every year and talk to the messenger? Well, there were only two main visits, 1823 and 1824. And in 1824 it failed. End of story.
And you talk about 2 years where he probably didn't visit.
Nothing. It was over. He didn't get the plates. Not angel, but the spirit won. Okay, and it's just like any other treasure he never got.
But before then, he must have been sitting around the house telling stories about Indians to his family.
Yeah,
and you're saying that as he was telling these Indian stories to his family, he referenced a book in a hill that he was reading from, and this obviously will project to the Book of Abraham, to that scroll that he translates from the Doctrine and Covenants from some cave in the Book of John or something.
Yeah,
from some cave.
He reads
So that
remote viewing.
That claimed ability to remote view
Yeah.
can be seen as early as 1823. And that's where maybe the beginnings of the story of the Book of Mormon take place, because he's telling these stories to his family, and he's claiming that he's reading it off of some golden plates in a hill. Is that right?
Yeah, and he's trying to solve his family problems through this method.
How?
Because it has content in it that solves his parents' religious debates.
Oh, so he's stressed out that his parents are fighting, because we know Lucy wants Joseph Smith Sr. to join
let's
the
tell
church.
That story.
Okay.
So the family dynamics is that Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy are pretty much together on no true church existing. There's no true church. Let's not baptize our children. Up until Alvin dies. Okay. When Alvin dies, and Reverend Stockton, the Presbyterian minister, where Lucy occasionally went, she hadn't joined or anything, but she had occasionally went, she knew Stockton, and she let Stockton do the funeral sermon. And during the funeral sermon, and this is mostly information from William Smith, Reverend Stockton imprudently implied that Alvin had gone to hell because he was trying to convert people in the audience that weren't members of any church yet. And Joseph Smith Sr. got incensed, is how William states it. He got incensed and refused going anymore. And Joseph Smith Jr. was torn between the two parents, because soon after Alvin died in 1824, a revival hit Palmyra. And it's just exactly how Joseph Smith describes it for 1820. Right. There's a war of words and contest over opinions and trying to get converts. And Lucy joins the Presbyterian Church. She's so anxious about Alvin's death, really. You know, how vulnerable people are after deaths in their families, especially children. And so she joins and starts trying to pressure other family members to join. And three of the oldest children, Hiram, Samuel, and Sophronia, join. William said he didn't care about religion, so he was not interested, really. Joseph Smith felt very pressured, torn between his parents, and was ambivalent and had a hard time deciding. And he's leaned towards the Methodist Church, actually. And it was Reverend George Lane, my relative, was there preaching about, which church is true and stuff. So this is what I maintain, is that Joseph Smith wasn't concerned about which church is true in 1820. I mean, in 1820, his parents were united. And the 1832 version of his first vision wasn't about which church was true. It's about personal salvation, and since there is no true church, how am I going to be saved? So, and Jesus comes and says, by faith. So that was probably closer to if something happened to what happened. But in 1824, he is concerned over which church is true because his family's fighting about it.
But just to back up a tiny bit, we were talking about in 1823, him reading from the book in the hill to try and solve his parents' problems. That was prior to Alvin's death. But even then, there was still religious conflict in the home.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you're saying that part of the reason why he's channeling from a book is to try and claim some sort of divine mandate to any sort of spiritual solution to the strife in his home.
Yes, thank you.
Is that right?
Yes,
okay.
But I forgot maybe something. But Lucy in her history writes that on the night that Joseph Smith had this dream vision of Moroni.
Was it Nephi or Moroni originally?
Well, that's another story I should hold off on.
Okay.
But so she writes that on that night, they were discussing a variety of religious topics. She makes it sound so benign, like there's nothing good, really that serious. We're just talking about religion and truth and stuff. No, they were arguing to such an extent that young Joseph was distraught. And he wanted to find a solution
to the problem.
To the problem. And the reason why they're probably debating is that Joseph Smith Sr.'s dreams say that there's no true church, so he's locked in on that. And he's also a universalist and probably a Unitarian, because universalism is the belief that everyone is saved no matter what. And Unitarianism is the denial that Jesus is God and that Jesus is only the Son of God. There's only one God, the Father. And then Jesus shares the divine, but isn't divine himself. So it's kind of like denying that. And that's one reason why the Book of Mormon starts out that it's written to prove that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God.
So these are all the questions Joseph Smith was trying to resolve within his own family.
Right. So Unitarians and Universalists were kind of separate groups, but the beliefs were so similar, and most Universalists were Unitarians, that later in the 19th century they merged. So
and just to be clear, so the original visitation of Moroni was probably born out of conflict in the Smith home, where Joseph's trying to claim some divine source for a resolution of the family conflict? Is that what you're... And that's in 1823.
I believe that's what happened in 1823, because that's what happened later.
Okay. And it would have been then that Joseph first... He needed a source for this instruction. And so...
This is the thing where we get to the notion of pseudepigrapha, which is pseudo-writing, writing under an assumed name. So pseudepigrapha goes back to, ancient times. I mean, the book of Deuteronomy is a pseudepigrapha because it wasn't written by Moses. They pretended like they found it in the foundation of the temple when they returned, from Babylonia. And so it's a repetition of the law, and it solved a lot of problems by having this book of Deuteronomy come forth. And this is where Thomas Paine called the book of Deuteronomy pious fraud. That's where that term comes from. Pious fraud is an old term. And there's books in the New Testament that aren't written by Paul, that assume Paul. The reason why they're writing these names, say the Assumption of Moses is a pseudepigrapha, the Ascension of Isaiah, these are pseudo writings because the pseudepigraphist wants to cause people to believe a certain doctrine that they think is important for the church, but they write in the assumed name of a dead prophet that already has charisma and reputation, and try to borrow theirs,
credibility,
and to get people to change their doctrines. Well, Joseph Smith did a similar thing in the Book of Mormon, but he made up his prophets. But when he wrote the Book of Abraham, and that was Abraham, he was using Abraham to get across some of his ideas through the Book of Abraham, and using Abraham's name, not his own.
And so are you saying that in 1823, when he's starting to channel these revelations or these teachings, that's a pseudepigraphical act of channeling a prophet that he would have made up, which is an ancient American prophet.
Right.
And anyway, it was there that he had to claim a source, and so the source is the golden plates. And that's where the idea of golden plates originally comes from.
Yeah.
And that's why when Alvin is on his deathbed, I read in your book, what he says to Joseph is what?
Make sure you
procure
get
the record.
Make sure
right?
at all costs get the record.
Okay, so the Smith family's knowing that there are plates and that Joseph's claiming there's plates in a close by hill as early as 1823. And you're saying that idea, again, came out of his attempt to try and resolve family conflict or something to that effect.
Right. But the target is his father, because this is what his father believes. His father's more likely to, instead of listening to his son, right, which isn't very persuasive, Joseph Smith needs more authority to get his father's ear. His father already believes in the stone. His father believes the stone works and his son has a gift. So he uses that to get his father's attention to hear his words.
I got it. And
hey, Father, I'm talking to you. Listen to me. This is what you should believe.
And he does it in a pseudepigraphical way to give him more authority. So his dad will say, well, this is from a spirit, an ancient Indian spirit that's telling me these things. Right? Okay.